My name is Captain Sophia Chen, and to my family, I was the disgrace who ruined everything. The daughter who got kicked out of the military and disappeared for years. They abandoned me at our mother's funeral, walking away while I stood alone at her graveside. But they had no idea who I really was, until the Pentagon Chief walked up to my brother and said 5 words that changed everything. "Your sister commands me." My name is Captain Sophia Chen, and to my family, I was the cautionary tale they whispered about after dinner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The daughter who threw away a promising military career and vanished into disgrace. The sister who never called, never visited, never gave them anything worth bragging about to their friends. At family gatherings, my name came up between awkward silences and forced conversations. My father would clear his throat and change the subject whenever someone asked about me. My mother would get that look in her eyes, the one that said she'd failed as a parent somewhere along the way. My brother Marcus would just shake his head like my very existence was a personal embarrassment he had to carry. What they told people was simple. Sophia got kicked out of the military for misconduct. She couldn't handle the pressure. She disappeared and never looked back. They had crafted this neat little narrative that explained away my absence from their lives, my missing face in family photos, my empty chair at holiday dinners. The truth was messier, but they never bothered to ask for it. When I first enlisted, they threw a party. My mother made her famous dumplings, and my father actually smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. Marcus even bragged to his college friends that his sister was going to be an officer. They had dreams of military balls and ceremony photos, of me in dress blues bringing honor to the Chen family name. For 2 years, I sent letters from Fort Bragg, then from overseas deployments. I kept them brief and upbeat. Training is intense but rewarding. The team here is incredible. Hope everyone is doing well back home. I sent photos of myself in uniform, standing proud with my unit, living the life they thought they wanted for me. Then everything changed and the letters stopped coming. What they knew was this. In my 3rd year of service, there was an incident. Something about classified information and a security breach. The official story was that I had violated protocol, compromised operational security, and was facing disciplinary action. Before any formal proceedings could begin, I resigned my commission and disappeared. The local newspaper ran a small article, "Local military officer resigns following security investigation." No details, no specifics, just enough to fuel gossip at the grocery store and church potlucks. My parents stopped going to their usual restaurants. My father quit his poker night. My mother avoided the neighbors. Marcus was in his senior year of college then, studying business administration and dating the daughter of a prominent local family. My disgrace became his burden. At family events on his girlfriend's side, people would ask about his sister in the military. He learned to say, "She's no longer serving," and then quickly changed the subject. The shame spread through our extended family like ink and water. Aunts and uncles stopped asking about me. Cousins deleted me from social media. The family WhatsApp group that used to buzz with updates and photos went silent whenever my name came up. My parents developed a practiced response. "Sophia is finding her way. We're focusing on Marcus and his future now." It was clean, diplomatic, and completely untrue. What they didn't know, what they never asked, was that my resignation wasn't the end of my military career. It was the beginning of something they couldn't imagine, something that required them to believe I had failed. Because if my family thought I was a disgrace, then everyone else would too. And sometimes, being invisible was exactly what the mission required. For 5 years, I let them carry their version of my story. I let them explain away my absence, my silence, my apparent failure. I became the daughter they were ashamed to mention, the sister who had thrown away everything they had hoped for. And on the day we buried our mother, they made it clear that their shame had finally overcome whatever love might have remained. While I became the family's unspoken disappointment, my brother Marcus transformed into their golden child. Everything I had apparently failed to become, he achieved effortlessly. Where I had brought shame, he brought pride. Where I had created awkward silences, he generated applause. Marcus graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown with a business degree, married Amanda Whitmore, daughter of a federal judge, and landed a prestigious position at Morrison & Associates, one of D.C.'s most influential government relations firms. Within 3 years, he was making six figures and rubbing shoulders with senators and cabinet members. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect for my parents. At dinner parties, they had Marcus to talk about instead of having to deflect questions about me. "Our son works in government affairs," my mother would beam. "He's consulting on defense appropriations bills. Very important work." My father would nod knowingly, finally able to hold his head high at the country club again. Marcus understood his role perfectly. He posted family photos on social media, him with Amanda at charity galas, skiing in Aspen, attending White House Christmas parties. He bought my parents a new car for their anniversary and flew them to Hawaii for their 40th wedding anniversary. He gave them grandchildren, twin boys named Jonathan and Christopher, who became the center of their universe. The family narrative became simple and clean. Marcus was the success story, the son who had made something of himself. I was the cautionary tale, the daughter who had thrown everything away. At Marcus's wedding, I wasn't even mentioned in the speeches. In the family Christmas cards, there were photos of Marcus, Amanda, and the twins, with my parents beaming in the background. I might as well have never existed. Marcus's achievements weren't just professional. They were social currency. Amanda's father, Judge Whitmore, introduced Marcus to influential circles. Soon, Marcus was playing golf with defense contractors, attending exclusive fundraisers, and building a network that most people could only dream of accessing. My mother started volunteering for Amanda's charity events, finally feeling like she belonged among the other political wives. My father joined Marcus for hunting trips with clients, stories he could tell for months afterward. The Chen family had finally arrived in Washington society, and it was all because of Marcus. The irony was devastating. While my family celebrated Marcus's access to the defense establishment, his meetings with Pentagon officials, his contracts with military suppliers, his invitations to classified briefings, they had no idea that the daughter they'd disowned was operating at levels Marcus could never reach. At family gatherings, Marcus would casually drop names of generals he'd met, contracts his firm had secured, inside information about military budgets and strategic initiatives. My parents hung on every word, proud that their son had such important connections. Amanda would show photos from embassy receptions and Pentagon ceremonies, and my mother would share them with her friends, finally having something impressive to brag about. The twins became the family's future. Jonathan and Christopher Chen Whitmore, with their prep school educations and their grandfather, the judge, represented everything my parents had dreamed of: respectability, connections, legacy. They were the grandchildren who would carry the family name forward, unlike their aunt who had vanished into disgrace. Marcus's success story became the family's redemption narrative. Yes, they had failed with one daughter, but they had raised a son who understood responsibility, who had built something real, who had given them a reason to be proud again. What they didn't realize was that while Marcus was networking his way into the defense world's outer circles, his disgraced sister was operating at its very center. But that truth would remain hidden until the day we laid our mother to rest, and the most powerful man in the Pentagon decided it was time for my brother to learn exactly where his sister really stood in the hierarchy he was so desperate to climb. While my family built their narrative around my disgrace and Marcus's success, I lived in a world they couldn't imagine. My days began before dawn with encrypted communications from secured terminals in locations that didn't officially exist. My phone had 3 different numbers, none of which my family had ever known. I lived in a modest apartment in Arlington, Virginia, under a lease that listed my occupation as, quote, government contractor. My neighbors knew me as Sophia Chen, the quiet woman who traveled frequently for work and kept irregular hours. They never asked too many questions, which was exactly how I needed it. My mail came to a P.O. box downtown. My bank statements showed regular deposits from something called Strategic Solutions LLC, a company that existed only on paper. My taxes were filed by an accountant who had security clearance and asked no questions about the gaps in my employment history. When I went grocery shopping, I paid cash. When I traveled, I used different credit cards depending on the assignment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My car was registered to a shell company, and my insurance listed an address that was actually a federal building in Quantico. I had no social media presence. No LinkedIn profile, no Facebook account, no Instagram photos. As far as the digital world was concerned, Sophia Chen had vanished after her military resignation. The woman who existed now lived in the spaces between official records. My closet held two types of clothing: the unremarkable business casual wardrobe of a mid-level government contractor, and the formal attire required for meetings that happened in rooms without windows. I owned exactly 3 dresses suitable for occasions where appearing normal was part of the mission. My days were unpredictable. Sometimes I'd spend weeks in the Arlington apartment, attending briefings at the Pentagon or meeting with analysts at CIA headquarters. Other times I'd disappear for months, returning with a tan from places I couldn't name and stamps and a passport that showed countries I'd never officially visited. The work was intense and isolating. I operated under clearance levels that required me to compartmentalize every aspect of my life. I couldn't tell anyone where I'd been, what I'd done, or who I'd worked with. I couldn't form close relationships because trust required transparency I couldn't provide. I lived between worlds, too classified for civilian life, too invisible for military recognition. I attended meetings where 4-star generals briefed me on situations that could destabilize entire regions. I made decisions that influenced policy at the highest levels of government. Then I'd go home to my quiet apartment and microwave a frozen dinner while watching Netflix like any other single woman in her 30s. The isolation was the hardest part. Not the dangerous assignments or the pressure of classified decisions, but the complete inability to share my life with anyone who mattered to me. I couldn't tell my parents why I couldn't visit for holidays. I couldn't explain to old friends why I'd stopped returning their calls. I couldn't correct the narrative my family had built around my failure. Some nights, I'd sit in my apartment and wonder what it would feel like to be normal again. To have a job I could describe at dinner parties, relationships that didn't require security briefings, a life that existed in the light instead of the shadows. But then my secure phone would buzz with a new assignment, and I'd remember why the sacrifice mattered. While my family worried about social status and dinner party conversations, I was working to keep the world safe from threats they would never know existed. The irony was perfect. They were ashamed of me for failing at the very thing I had actually mastered beyond their wildest dreams. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in September, during what should have been a routine intelligence briefing at Fort Belvoir. I was 3 years into my service as a military intelligence officer, stationed with the 902nd Military Intelligence Group, when everything I thought I knew about my career changed forever. I had been analyzing intercepted communications from a suspected terrorist cell operating in eastern Syria. Standard counterintelligence work, patterns, codes, behavioral analysis. But something in the data didn't fit the official assessment. While my superiors were focused on the obvious threats, I noticed inconsistencies that suggested something much larger was happening. The intercepted messages referenced operational timelines that didn't match any known terrorist activities. The geographic coordinates mentioned in the communications pointed to locations that weren't strategic targets. Most concerning of all, the communication patterns suggested coordination with elements that had access to classified U.S. military movements. I spent 3 sleepless nights cross-referencing the data with classified databases I probably shouldn't have accessed. What I found made my blood run cold. Someone with high-level security clearance was feeding information to hostile forces. Not just tactical intelligence, but strategic plans that could compromise ongoing operations and cost American lives. I brought my findings to my commanding officer, Colonel Bradley Morrison, expecting immediate action. Instead, I was told to stick to your assigned analysis parameters and warned about overstepping boundaries. When I persisted, insisting that American soldiers were in immediate danger, I was ordered to destroy my research and forget what I'd found. But I couldn't forget. Not when I knew that Operation Desert Shield, a classified mission involving 200 American Special Forces operators, was being planned using the same communication channels I'd identified as compromised. I made a choice that would destroy my family's perception of me forever. I went around my commanding officer and took my findings directly to the Defense Intelligence Agency. I knew it would end my conventional military career, but I couldn't live with the alternative. Within 48 hours, Operation Desert Shield was quietly canceled. Within a week, 3 high-ranking military contractors had been arrested in connection with an espionage investigation. Within a month, Colonel Morrison himself was under investigation for his role in suppressing intelligence that could have prevented a catastrophic security breach. But publicly, none of that could be acknowledged. The official story had to be different, cleaner, less politically damaging. Someone had to take the fall for the security breach that had supposedly compromised the operation. Someone had to be the scapegoat who had mishandled classified information and violated protocol. That someone was me. The headlines wrote themselves. Military intelligence officer resigns following security investigation. The implication was clear. I had screwed up, leaked information, failed under pressure. My family, reading between the lines of carefully crafted military press releases, came to the obvious conclusion. Their daughter had disgraced herself and the uniform. What they never knew was that my resignation was actually a recruitment. While I was being publicly drummed out of the military for misconduct, I was privately being offered a position that didn't officially exist. The Defense Intelligence Agency wanted someone who had proven they would choose American lives over career advancement, even when it cost them everything. The offer came with conditions that would make my family's shame permanent. I could never tell anyone what really happened. I could never correct the narrative. I would have to let them believe I had failed, because my new role required invisibility that only disgrace could provide. I accepted, knowing it meant sacrificing my family's love and respect forever. Some prices are worth paying, even when the people you're protecting will never know you saved them. What my family never knew was that my disgraceful resignation had launched me into the most classified intelligence division in the U.S. military. I became part of Task Force ShadowNet, a joint operation between the Defense Intelligence Agency, CIA, and National Security Agency that existed in the spaces between official government structures. My new title was Senior Intelligence Analyst for Asymmetric Threat Assessment, but that designation appeared on exactly 0 organizational charts. My work involved identifying and neutralizing threats that conventional intelligence agencies couldn't touch. Rogue state actors, international criminal organizations with military capabilities, and sleeper cells embedded within foreign governments. Within my first year, I had helped prevent a coordinated cyber attack on 3 major U.S. military installations. The operation involved tracking digital footprints across 17 countries, coordinating with assets in hostile territories, and implementing countermeasures that shut down the attack network without the perpetrators ever knowing they'd been detected. I spent 6 months undercover in Belgrade, posing as a freelance journalist while mapping the financial networks of an arms trafficking organization that was supplying weapons to terrorist groups across North Africa. The intelligence I gathered led to the seizure of $200 million in weapons and the arrest of 43 operatives across 6 countries. My analysis of communication patterns between suspected Iranian intelligence operatives revealed a plot to assassinate a U.S. ambassador in Turkey. The operation was so sensitive that only 12 people in the entire U.S. government knew it existed. We neutralized the threat 3 days before the planned attack, and the ambassador never knew how close he'd come to death. But perhaps my most significant achievement was Operation Black Mirror, a 2-year investigation into a network of Chinese intelligence operatives who had infiltrated defense contractors across the American aerospace industry. Working with a team of only 8 people, I helped expose a spy ring that had been stealing classified technology for advanced missile guidance systems. The operation required me to spend 14 months living under deep cover in Seattle, working as a systems analyst for Boeing, while secretly documenting how classified information was being extracted and transmitted to Beijing. When we finally moved to shut down the network, we arrested 27 people and prevented the theft of technology that could have given China a decisive military advantage. The work demanded everything. I learned to speak Mandarin, Arabic, and Russian fluently. I became an expert in digital forensics, international banking law, and psychological profiling. I could disappear into any identity required by the mission: businesswoman, academic, aid worker, journalist. Most importantly, I learned to command. By my 4th year with Task Force Shadow.net, I was leading operations that involved coordinating assets across multiple agencies and countries. Generals who appeared on Sunday morning talk shows took orders from me. CIA station chiefs in hostile territories reported directly to me. Pentagon officials who briefed the president implemented strategies I had developed. Kenna. My security clearance was so high it didn't have an official designation. I attended meetings where the Joint Chiefs of Staff asked for my assessment before making recommendations to the Secretary of Defense. I sat in situation rooms where decisions affecting global stability were made based on intelligence I had gathered. When there was a credible threat to American interests anywhere in the world, my secure phone was one of the first to ring. When the president needed analysis of threats that couldn't be trusted to conventional channels, my reports landed on his desk within hours. The woman my family saw as a failure was actually one of the most powerful intelligence officers in the American government. While they worried about my lack of visible success, I was preventing wars, stopping terrorist attacks, and protecting American lives on a scale they couldn't imagine. But maintaining that power required absolute invisibility, and invisibility meant letting my family believe I had failed at everything they valued most. While I was preventing international crises and commanding some of the most sensitive operations in U.S. intelligence, my family's disappointment in me only grew deeper. What had started as concern about my career setback evolved into genuine shame about my apparent inability to rebuild my life. The holidays became exercises in emotional endurance. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and birthday was another opportunity for my family to highlight the contrast between Marcus's rising success and my apparent stagnation. At Marcus's promotion celebrations, his twins' birthday parties, and Amanda's charity events, I was either not invited or quietly discouraged from attending. "We just think it might be awkward for you," my mother would say when explaining why I wasn't included in family photos or holiday gatherings. "You know how people talk. Marcus works with some very important clients now." The worst part was watching how they talked about me when they thought I couldn't hear. At Marcus's wedding reception, I overheard my father telling Judge Whitmore, "We're focusing on our son now. Sophia, well, some children just take different paths." The dismissal in his voice cut deeper than any direct criticism could have. My mother tried to maintain some semblance of maternal concern, but her efforts only made things worse. She would call occasionally with opportunities she'd heard about, administrative jobs at local businesses, suggestions that I consider going back to school, offers to help me get back on my feet. "Mrs. Patterson from church mentioned her nephew runs a consulting firm," she'd say. "I know it's not military work, but maybe it's time to try something more realistic." The implication was always clear. I had aimed too high and failed, and now I needed to accept a more modest life. The family text chain became my personal torture device. Marcus would share photos from Pentagon meetings, Amanda would post pictures from embassy receptions, and my parents would respond with pride and excitement. Meanwhile, my contributions to family conversations became increasingly unwelcome. When I tried to engage, asking about Marcus's work or commenting on family updates, my messages were often ignored or met with brief, polite responses that made it clear I was interrupting more important conversations. The breaking point came during my nephew's 6th birthday party. I had spent 3 weeks between assignments and decided to attend, hoping to reconnect with family. Instead, I found myself standing alone while other guests, Marcus's colleagues, and Amanda's society friends mingled around me. When one of Marcus's clients asked what I did for work, before I could answer, Marcus jumped in with, "Sophia's between opportunities right now. She's figuring out her next steps." The patronizing tone, the apologetic smile, the way he quickly changed the subject. It was clear that my presence was an embarrassment he had to manage. Later that evening, I overheard Amanda telling another guest, "Marcus's sister had some trouble in the military. We're all hoping she finds her way eventually." The casual dismissal, the assumption that I was lost and needed guidance, the complete ignorance of who I actually was. It crystallized everything that had been building for years. My father stopped asking about my life entirely. My mother's calls became lectures about responsibility and moving forward. Marcus treated me like a charity case who needed careful handling. Extended family members avoided me at gatherings, unsure how to navigate conversations with the family disappointment. They had created such a complete narrative around my failure that any evidence to the contrary became invisible to them. When I appeared healthy, confident, and financially stable, they attributed it to family help or temporary luck. When I traveled frequently, they assumed I was running from my problems rather than solving international crises. B. The isolation became absolute. I was surrounded by family who loved me but could no longer see me. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. My secure phone buzzed with the tone reserved for family emergencies, the only kind of personal call that could breach my operational security protocols. My mother's voice was broken, barely recognizable through the tears. "Sophia, it's Mom. She had a stroke. The doctors, they don't think she's going to make it." I was on a plane to Virginia within 6 hours, leaving behind a counterterrorism operation in Eastern Europe that I'd been coordinating for 3 months. For the first time in 5 years, my personal life took priority over national security. My handler understood. Family emergencies were the one exception to our absolute commitment rule. Mom lingered for 4 days in the ICU at Virginia Commonwealth University Medical Center. During those final days, our family dynamics played out in heartbreaking clarity. Marcus and Amanda maintained a constant presence, coordinating with doctors, managing the medical decisions, handling the logistics that come with losing a parent. I stayed in the background, visiting during off hours when fewer family friends would be around. Even in crisis, I remained the family member who needed to be managed carefully, whose presence might create awkward questions they weren't prepared to answer. "Sophia's here too," I heard my father telling visitors, his tone suggesting surprise that I'd bothered to show up at all. "She's been traveling a lot for work lately." The careful vagueness, the slight emphasis on work, even grief couldn't override his discomfort with my unexplained life. During those long hospital days, I watched Marcus coordinate with precision that would have impressed my military colleagues. He managed the medical team, organized family communications, and began preliminary planning for the funeral arrangements. Amanda supported him with the kind of social grace that made everything appear effortless. My role was to stay invisible and not complicate things. When Mom passed on Friday evening, the family dynamics immediately shifted into funeral planning mode. Marcus and Amanda took control of the arrangements with the same efficiency they brought to everything else. The service would be held at Arlington National Cemetery. My father's military service had earned Mom that honor, followed by a reception at the country club where my parents had been members for 20 years. The guest list revealed everything about how my family saw their place in Washington society. Marcus's colleagues from Morrison and Associates would attend, along with Amanda's network of political wives and social connections. Judge Whitmore would deliver one of the eulogies. Several of Marcus's Pentagon clients had requested permission to pay their respects. "It's going to be a significant gathering," Amanda explained to relatives who called to offer condolences. "Many important people want to honor Mom's memory." The subtext was clear. This funeral would be a reflection of the Chen family's social standing, a final opportunity to demonstrate their respectability and connections. I received the funeral details through a group text, the same way distant relatives and family friends were informed. There was no family meeting about arrangements, no consultation about my preferences, no acknowledgement that I might have opinions about how we honored our mother. The message was clinical. Funeral service Tuesday, 2 p.m., Arlington National Cemetery. Reception following at Meadowbrook Country Club. Please dress appropriately and arrive early. Limited parking available. When I replied that I would attend, Marcus responded with a private text. "Just so you know, there will be a lot of my colleagues there. I'd appreciate it if you kept a low profile." Even at our mother's funeral, I was expected to manage my presence carefully, to avoid embarrassing the family in front of the important people who would be watching. What none of them realized was that some of those important people already knew exactly who I was. The funeral service at Arlington National Cemetery was everything Marcus had orchestrated it to be: dignified, well-attended, and perfectly reflective of the Chen family's social standing. Judge Whitmore delivered a moving eulogy about my mother's contributions to the community. Amanda coordinated the flowers with military precision. Marcus served as the primary point of contact for the dozens of officials and colleagues who came to pay their respects. I sat in the second row, wearing the black dress I kept for occasions when blending in was more important than standing out. My father sat stiffly beside me, nodding politely to the stream of well-wishers who approached him before and after the service. Marcus and Amanda held court near the front, graciously accepting condolences from Pentagon officials, defense contractors, and political figures who formed the core of their professional network. As we prepared to leave for the reception, I noticed several high-ranking military officials clustered near the cemetery's administration building. Their presence seemed more formal than the casual attendance of Marcus's colleagues. These men wore their dress uniforms with the kind of bearing that suggested they were here on official business, not just paying respects. At Meadowbrook Country Club, the reception unfolded exactly as Amanda had planned. Marcus worked the room with practiced ease, introducing colleagues to family members and ensuring that every important guest felt appropriately welcomed. Amanda coordinated with the catering staff while maintaining elegant conversations with the political wives who formed her social circle. I remained on the periphery, occasionally approached by distant relatives or family friends who offered brief condolences before moving on to more interesting conversations. My role was exactly what Marcus had requested: low profile, unremarkable, carefully managed. That changed when General Harrison Blackwood entered the reception hall. The Pentagon Chief of Staff's arrival caused a noticeable shift in the room's energy. Conversations quieted as people recognized one of the most powerful men in the American military. Marcus immediately moved toward him, clearly eager to make an impression on such a high-profile guest. "General Blackwood," Marcus said, extending his hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to networking with important people. "Marcus Chen, thank you so much for coming to honor my mother. This means everything to our family." General Blackwood shook Marcus's hand politely, but his eyes were scanning the room. When his gaze found me standing near the back wall, his expression shifted into something between relief and recognition. "Mr. Chen," the general said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent reception hall, "I'm here to pay my respects to your mother, but I need to speak with your sister." Marcus's confident smile faltered slightly. "My sister? I'm not sure what." "Your sister?" General Blackwood repeated, walking past Marcus and approaching me directly. The room had gone completely quiet now. Every conversation stopped, every eye following the most powerful military official present as he crossed the reception hall. When he reached me, General Blackwood stopped and looked directly into my eyes. Then, in a voice that carried to every corner of the silent room, he said 5 words that shattered my family's understanding of everything they thought they knew about me. "Your sister commands me." The silence that followed was absolute. I could see Marcus's face go pale, his mouth opening slightly as he tried to process what he'd just heard. Amanda's perfectly composed expression cracked into confusion. My father's hands gripped his coffee cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. General Blackwood continued, his voice formal but unmistakably respectful. "Colonel Chen, I'm sorry for your loss. The entire Joint Chiefs wanted me to convey our condolences. Your mother raised an exceptional officer." The word colonel hit the room like a shockwave. The silence that followed General Blackwood's declaration stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could hear the grandfather clock in the corner of the reception hall ticking, the distant sound of ice clinking in abandoned glasses, the barely audible whisper of someone saying, "Oh my God," under their breath. Marcus stood frozen, his confident networking smile completely gone, replaced by an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. "Colonel?" he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "But she was discharged. There was an investigation. General Blackwood's expression didn't change. "Colonel Chen operates under the highest levels of classification. Her service record is restricted to personnel with appropriate clearance." He paused, letting that sink in before adding, "which would not include civilian contractors, regardless of their Pentagon connections." The last part was delivered with the kind of polite dismissal that only a 4-star general could manage. Technically respectful, but unmistakably clear about Marcus's actual position in the military hierarchy he'd spent years trying to penetrate. Amanda stepped forward, her social instincts kicking in even as her carefully constructed worldview crumbled around her. "I'm sorry, General, but there must be some mistake. Sophia hasn't been in the military for years. She doesn't even have a job." "Mrs. Chen Whitmore," General Blackwood interrupted, his tone remaining professional but gaining an edge that made Amanda step back. "Your sister-in-law currently holds one of the most sensitive positions in the United States intelligence community. The operations she commands have prevented multiple terrorist attacks and thwarted several attempts at foreign espionage. Just last month, her analysis prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach of our missile defense systems." I watched my father's face throughout this exchange, seeing decades of carefully held assumptions cracking apart in real time. His hands shook as he set down his coffee cup, the china rattling against the saucer. When he looked at me, it was like he was seeing a stranger. "Sophia?" he said, my name coming out like a question he'd never thought to ask before. Is this true?" Before I could answer, General Blackwood continued. "Colonel Chen's cover required her family to believe she had failed. It was essential to her operational security. The sacrifice she made, allowing her own family to think she was a disgrace, is one of the most difficult aspects of intelligence work." The room was still silent, but I could feel the energy shifting. Other guests were processing what they'd witnessed, realizing they had just seen one of the most powerful men in the military defer to the woman they'd been treating as an embarrassment all evening. Judge Whitmore, who had delivered my mother's eulogy with such dignity an hour earlier, approached our small group. "General Blackwood, I had no idea that Marcus's sister was—" He trailed off, clearly unsure how to finish that sentence. "Few people do, Your Honor," the general replied. "That's rather the point." Marcus finally found his voice again, but it came out strained and uncertain. "Sophia, why couldn't you tell us?" I looked at my brother, really looked at him, for the first time in years. The successful government relations expert, the man who'd built his career on Pentagon connections, the son who'd replaced me in my parents' pride and affection. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the realization that his carefully cultivated access to the defense establishment had never brought him close to the level where his own sister operated. "Because you never asked what really happened," I said quietly. "You asked what went wrong. You asked when I was going to get my life together. You asked when I was going to stop embarrassing the family. But you never asked what I actually did when I left the military." Amanda's perfectly composed facade finally cracked completely. "But the investigation, the newspaper article, everyone said you were discharged for misconduct." General Blackwood answered before I could. "Operational cover. The best way to hide an intelligence officer is to make everyone believe they failed at something else." My father was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "All these years," he said slowly, I told people you couldn't handle the pressure." "I know. We were ashamed," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "We were ashamed of you." "I know." The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with 5 years of accumulated disappointment and missed connections. Around us, the reception continued in muted conversations as other guests processed what they'd witnessed. But our small family circle had become its own isolated world of revelation and reckoning. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was overwhelmed. "Jesus, Sophia. I've spent years building relationships with Pentagon officials, trying to get access to classified briefings, working to establish credibility in defense circles. And I've been commanding the operations they brief other people about," I finished quietly. Amanda looked like she was going to be sick. All those embassy receptions and political fundraisers, all those carefully cultivated relationships with military wives and defense officials, all that social climbing to establish their position in Washington's defense establishment. And she'd been married into a family whose most impressive member was the one they'd all been trying to hide. General Blackwood checked his watch. "Colonel, I should let you return to your family. but I wanted to pay my respects to your mother personally. She raised an exceptional daughter." As he turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Marcus. "Mr. Chen, your sister has prevented more threats to American security than most people will ever know. Perhaps you should be proud of her." Then he was gone, leaving us standing in the sudden quiet of a reception that had been fundamentally altered by 5 words. "Your sister commands me." The reception continued for another hour after General Blackwood's departure, but everything had fundamentally changed. Conversations resumed in hushed tones as guests processed what they'd witnessed. Pentagon officials who had previously treated me as invisible now approached with careful respect, their demeanor shifting from polite dismissal to professional acknowledgement. I found myself surrounded by the same defense contractors and military officials who had spent years networking with Marcus, but now they were seeking me out. A man who'd previously introduced himself as a senior executive with Lockheed Martin approached with the kind of careful deference usually reserved for flag officers. "Colonel Chen," he said quietly, "I had no idea. Your work on the Black Mirror operation, that was extraordinary intelligence work." I simply nodded, offering no details, no confirmation beyond acknowledgement. Even in revelation, operational security remained paramount. Meanwhile, Marcus stood with Amanda near the far wall, both of them looking like their entire worldview had collapsed. I could see them whispering intensely, Amanda gesturing sharply while Marcus shook his head repeatedly. The social confidence that had defined their approach to every family gathering for the past 5 years had evaporated completely. My father approached me as the reception began winding down, his steps uncertain and his eyes filled with something I'd never seen before, not just confusion but genuine remorse. "Sophia," he said, my name carrying a weight it hadn't held in years. "I need to understand. All this time when I told people you couldn't handle military life, you were protecting my cover without knowing it," I said gently. "The best operational disguise is one that everyone believes completely, including family." He stared at me for a long moment. "But we abandoned you. Today, at your mother's funeral, we left you standing alone at her grave because we were embarrassed to be seen with you." The pain in his voice was raw and immediate. This wasn't just about discovering my true profession. It was about confronting 5 years of treatment that had driven a gulf between us that might never be fully bridged. "Dad, you did what you thought was right based on the information you had. But we never asked for more information," he said, his voice breaking. "We never asked what really happened. We just accepted that you'd failed and moved on." I looked around the reception hall, where Marcus's carefully cultivated network of defense establishment contacts were now viewing our family through an entirely different lens. The Chen family dynamics had been permanently altered, and there was no going back to the comfortable narrative they'd built around my disgrace and Marcus's success. As the reception ended and guests began departing, Marcus finally approached me. His confident networking persona had been replaced by something smaller and more vulnerable. "Sophia, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything." "But I do," he insisted. "I spent years building connections in the defense world, trying to establish credibility, working to gain access to classified briefings. And you," he trailed off, shaking his head. "And I was doing the job you were trying to get close to," I finished. "How can you not hate us?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How can you not hate me for treating you like an embarrassment when I was commanding operations that kept Americans safe?" I smiled, but there was no malice in it. "Because hating you would have made the sacrifice meaningless. I chose to let you believe I'd failed because it served a larger purpose. Your embarrassment was part of my cover." Amanda joined us, her perfectly composed social mask finally gone completely. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. The things I said about you, the way I acted, I thought you were a failure who couldn't get her life together. I know." I looked at both of them, seeing the genuine distress in their faces. "But here's what you need to understand. I didn't need your approval to do my job. I didn't need your recognition to save lives. I didn't need your pride to command respect from people who outrank every general you've ever met for photo opportunities." The words weren't harsh, but they carried the weight of 5 years of accumulated independence. I had learned to exist without their validation, and that freedom had become more valuable than any family reconciliation could offer. Marcus looked around the nearly empty reception hall. All these people, they all know now. Everyone who saw what happened here tonight knows that my sister is. He couldn't finish the sentence. Someone who operates at a level you'll never reach, no matter how many Pentagon Christmas parties you attend, I said matter-of-factly. That evening, as I drove back to my apartment in Arlington, my secure phone buzzed with a message from my handler. Operational cover blown at family level. Recommend transition to diplomatic immunity status. New assignment briefing Monday 0800. Even my family's discovery of my true role was being absorbed into operational planning. The work continued, regardless of personal revelations or family dynamics. Over the following weeks, my family made several attempts to reconnect. My father called repeatedly, trying to process the revelation and his own role in our estrangement. Marcus sent long text messages apologizing for years of condescension and dismissal. Amanda tried to invite me to family dinners where I could finally be myself, but they still didn't understand the fundamental truth. I had been myself all along. The woman they'd seen as a failure had been preventing international crises and commanding intelligence operations, while they worried about social status and dinner party conversations. I accepted their apologies gracefully but declined their invitations for reconciliation. Not out of spite, but because I had learned to live without their approval, and that independence was more valuable than returning to a family dynamic built on their need to understand and categorize my life. 3 months later, I received a new assignment that would take me to Southeast Asia for an extended operation. As I prepared to disappear into another identity in another part of the world, I realized that the woman who had stood alone at her mother's graveside was not the same person who now packed classified briefing materials for a mission that could prevent a regional conflict. My family had abandoned me at Mom's funeral, but I had never been abandoned by the work that gave my life meaning. And that work would always be enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.